impossible to talk about the earlier years without actually bringing in the family, because we were a pretty closely knit group, and we were dominated by a friendly dictator in the form of Pop, our father, and the grandfather, and quite a few were here, great-grandfather. My recollection starts in New Zealand. We lived in Remuera, which was a delightful suburb of Auckland. We had a very pleasant two-storied home with all the mod cons, lots of domestic help, and we lived a very peaceful, happy, contented life. Our father was the first Ford motor dealer in New Zealand, and consequently we used to travel constantly in his first Model T Ford around the countryside, and invariably on Sundays, if we weren't at our beach place, we were riding in the park, mostly to demonstrate the splendid motor vehicle. On one memorable occasion, we were going down a steepish hill in one of Auckland's park, and we dissolved in laughter as a spare wheel down the hill in front of us. But by the time we got to the bottom, it collapsed on our own axle. We knew where the wheel had come from. And in those days, incidentally, for the motoring things, you had to reverse up hills, because the fuel tank was gravity feed at the back, and if you wanted to get up the hill, you had to go backwards. Our father had bought a delightful property called Red Beach. It was 43 acres of largely undeveloped. There was a pleasant home on the hill which the family used. The 43 acres surrounded this private beach, and the only other people who had access to it were some dairy farmers at the very far end. On the flat below where our house was, there was a creek, and we developed a tennis court adjacent to the creek. And uncles and aunts gradually started building weekend homes fronting the creek. And so we had a marvellous fraternity of relatives, and Mary and Dudley grew up with cousins and quite young uncles who were wonderful soulmates for them. And amongst the houses there were two things called in New Zealand batches, where young unattached males, basically, Mary's beaux, and brother Dudley's friends would spend 2 or 3 days or a week or what have you.
We call them hotels here.
It was an idyllic place. The fish were abundant. There was a reef running out from the headland where our house was, and we'd see snapper, tails of snapper sticking up on the rock. My father would organise all the males around the place, uncles and Dudley and the rest of them, get the net out, take out the net, pour in huge quantities of fish, enough to feed all the relatives who were living at Red Beach. And you could walk along the beach and rub your foot into the wet sand and find pippies in abundance. And so we had this marvellous collection of seedlings. We had an orchard with apples and quinces and lots of blackberries. And some days we'd have a blackberry picking session, and we'd pick half a 4-gallon kerosene tin full of blackberries. And then all we had to do was walk along the beach to the dairy farm and pick up a billy can of milk which would have cream that thick. It was a wonderful lifestyle. There was getting there could be tricky at times. There was a main road that ran to within a couple of miles of Red Beach, and then was a dirt track. And in winter time, there was the rain, the dirt track just became a quagmire. So invariably we'd get to the end of the bitumen, Dad would have to get out and put on the chains on the four wheels of cars, since we didn't have four-wheel drive in those days. And so the chains would clank away and we'd slide and slither all the way to Red Beach. But it had its advantages. And of course, in due course of time, jumping some years, he had cause to break up Red Beach. He subdivided it, and he eventually sold it, and he did leave the legacy of 3 roads: Mari Avenue, Walton Road for my brother's second name, and Laurie Road. And today some of our relatives live in Mari Avenue. Sadly, about 1929, our father decided we should move to Sydney. He decided that he would retire from his motor business. He had done extraordinarily well, and he wanted wider horizons, so he came across to Sydney a few times. He went up to Cairns and explored, and then he ordained we should all up states and leave New Zealand. It was all right for me. Dudley stayed on. He was in grammar school. Mari had long since finished at St Cuthbert's, the school she went to in Auckland, and but she had to leave the love of her life, a character called Bill Walkley, and to this day I suspect she regrets that. But despite a subsequent happy marriage and children and the rest of it, Bill Walkley still somebody very special to her. Unfortunately, our father, in his wisdom, of course, picked a very bad time, 1929, 1930, to move to Australia, and a lot of his wealth disappeared in the Depression. However, he was still ambitious, and he became enamoured of Cairns, and he bought land at Mareeba and started arranging for the growing of tobacco. He was for his sins, he was the first tobacco grower in Australia. And in due course of time, he had some crops, and he had the tobacco manufactured into cigarettes, which were bloody awful. So there was no great market for those. And we had some pretty parlous times. We lived initially at Craig Nathan on the water at Neutral Bay, and then subsequently into various flats and small houses around Neutral Bay, Caraba Point and places like that. Mari, in the due course of time, of course, became involved with Paul Duval in the marketing of cosmetics. And I'm jumping quite a few years here, but she was extraordinarily successful at Paul Duval. She had a way with promoting, marketing sales, the like of which I have never done my life in marketing, but I bow to her as the ultimate marketeer. A woman would approach her with the idea of buying a small jar of powder or make cream or something or other, and she'd go out and get
Is that where you get it from, Mickey?
And I think at this stage I stopped. I could reminisce about Red Beach and all the great times we've had. But I think I'll pass on to a later generation.